So let's go ahead and get started today. Our expert panelists with Reckitt's Lysol Pro Solutions. With us today, we have Brian Leafblad, the Research and Development Senior Manager, along with Julie McKinney, Global Director of Microbiology and Virology. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you very much.
Jeff.
Yeah. Both will discuss the way germs can spread in facilities, how putting in place an effective hygiene program can help you with your work, produce a more productive workplace, protect your people throughout the colder months and beyond. So, Julie, I believe you're our first star of the show today. We'll turn it over to you.
Yes.
We're listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. And also thank you for those who have chosen to join today. As we heard, I know you're from around the world, and so you're calling in at much different time zones than myself. I'm in Virginia, and so we're sort of a seasonable 55 degrees right now. No snow, and we rarely get snow on this side of the state. So just to give you a little more context for why I'm specifically speaking with you first, I am a part of the Lysol Pro Solutions and greater Lysol team. I have a team of scientists who do infectious disease research for our company, but also we do disease surveillance. And so we're looking at how infectious disease impacts populations and also how it spreads throughout communities and businesses. So that's specifically my background and why I'm here to speak with you today. If we go to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the trends that my team and also some of our partner organizations have been seeing related to respiratory viruses this season, and then also thinking a little bit about beyond. I'm also going to get in a little bit of in the weeds with you about the microbiology of germ transmission, because really, if you can understand a little bit of those nuances about how germs spread, where you find them, gives you so much more information and then helps you really figure out how to protect your facilities. And then after that, I give you that information. Brian is going to step in and talk about how you can protect your facilities with this knowledge and also with some of the knowledge he's going to give you. And as Jeff said, then we will go into some questions. And so start thinking about those all along the way. We're very eager to answer your questions. So I am going to start with telling you a little bit about what we see as the trends during this particular respiratory virus season. And I think it goes without saying, we all know that this has been a very unusual 4 years, and we are still seeing some of the lagging implications of the pandemic. And so let's talk a little bit about what that means. Along with Lysol Pro Solutions, and we have a couple of partner organizations. One is called Blue Dot, and the other is called KENSA. All of us are sort of working together to look at what respiratory viruses are doing within the populations in order to have make some predictions, or also just some having an understanding of where we think things are going to go. We're never going to be able to predict, but we can understand based on the trends on what we can do to kind of offset some of the issues. So some of our early data suggests that RSV, flu, and COVID-19 are on the rise concurrently. However, there is a typical onset timing that we've seen comparing to pre-pandemic times, because after the pandemic, there was a period of time where we saw respiratory diseases and lots of other illnesses coming out of seasonal times. We were seeing them at very different times than we would have in the past. But now, although we're starting to see these three things at the same time, the onset is coming at the same time, which, as you can imagine, is leading to some really negative outcomes. We're seeing rises in hospital stays. We're seeing just lost days, more people sick. We believe, based on the surveillance, that we're going to see a peak now to late February. So hopefully we are getting past the worst of it for this year, and we'll be able to go to better days after that. Flu activity remains elevated in most parts of the country. We're seeing about a 63% increase from the 2022-23 year. And we do believe that's for a lot of different reasons still. Even though we don't see as much testing as there was going on during the pandemic, we still see elevated levels of testing. People being willing to go into the emergency clinics or hospitals to be tested. We didn't see that before the pandemic. So some of these numbers might be skewed by elevated testing and elevated awareness, but regardless, we're still seeing elevated numbers. We're still seeing high rates of COVID-19 throughout the month of January, but it was about a 14% reduction than what we were seeing for the prior week. We're seeing greater than 5% of COVID-19 cases linked to the most recent variant, JN1. There was only 5% in November, but now we're seeing about a greater than 60% linkage to that particular variant in COVID-19 cases. And this is very typical from what we've seen throughout the entire pandemic, but also through the variants that we see with the flu and RSV. So there's nothing really unusual about that. COVID-19 testing, as I said, is not as prevalent, and a lot of people reduce their uptake of booster shots. So this could be sort of contributing factors to what we're seeing. RSV activity remains elevated, though some areas of the country, specifically the United States, are seeing a decline. RSV is not, we don't typically see it quite in high numbers as we see the flu and of course COVID-19, but just because of this lag with immunity, we've seen consistently elevated numbers of RSV this year. Children in the southern hemisphere, like Chile, Brazil, or Uruguay, they've been affected by RSV in the winter season last year. So that goes to what I was saying in the beginning about we're seeing the incidence of these illnesses outside of typical seasonality. We believe, at least the scientific community believes, that over time we are going to be tracking where things are more consistent and normal than what they were with pre-pandemic conditions. So now, like I said, I just want to spend a few minutes talking to you about how germs are transmitted. Oops, excuse me. So, as public health professionals, when we talk about germ transmission, we talk about something called the chain of infection. And this is a series of events that have to happen in order to enable an infection to occur. So, it's not just the presence of an infectious agent or a pathogen that's going to make you sick. It's actually a combination of things. Is it in high enough numbers? Is it in the right place? Are you susceptible to that? So all of these different things would have to occur for you to be made sick. And so we think about this chain because if we can break in just one link of this chain, we can prevent the onset of illness or transmission of pathogenic organisms to other environments. So I'm going to talk about each one of these in just a little more detail. I'm going to talk about the infectious agent, which is the type of germs that we know and commonly see causing illness. We're going to talk about where they're found, where they multiply a little bit. We're also going to talk about how they get from that reservoir outside of that reservoir to something else or to an individual. We'll talk about how they do that. We'll talk about how they then might enter into a susceptible host or you in order to make you sick, and then we'll just go from there. Thank you. Okay, so types of germs. Microbes or microorganisms are tiny living things, except for viruses. And this is, I know to some people, a completely mind-blowing thought process, but viruses are not considered alive. They're considered inert particles that once they get into a susceptible host or a living entity, they then become activated and they become alive. When we think about viruses, very commonly the ones that come to mind are things like influenza, which causes the flu, rhinovirus, which is the cause of the common cold, norovirus, which causes gastroenteritis or vomiting and diarrhea. We have rotavirus, which also causes a form of gastroenteritis, and something like even as severe as Ebola, which is a hemorrhagic fever. Contrast that to bacteria, which are actual cells. They tend to be individual cells. And when we think about that category, we're talking about E. coli or Escherichia coli that causes food poisoning. We might be talking about Salmonella enterica, which causes typhoid fever, but also a type of gastroenteritis. Staph aureus or methicillin-resistant staph infections. Staph aureus can cause vomiting, but also MRSA, as we know, can cause skin infections, and then septicemia or blood infections. And then VRE, which also just is a form of gastroenteritis. Then we have fungi, and a couple of examples of the fungi would be Candida auris. During the pandemic, we've seen greater cases of fungal infections due to compromised immune systems due to COVID-19. So you may have heard about Candida in nursing homes, but very commonly we think about Candida in yeast infections or in foot fungal infections like the athlete's foot. We also have Aspergillus, which causes lung infections, and Trichophyton, which might cause skin infections. And then the last category on the far right is protozoa or parasites. Uh, we are not going to talk about bacteria, fungi, or parasites today, but your takeaway from this slide is just to know that there are microorganisms all around you. They are too small to be seen with the naked eye in most cases, and they have lots of different mechanisms of survival and also being able to move throughout environments to be able to get to a susceptible host to then cause illness. So they're very crafty and very diverse. So if we think about again the microorganisms and the type of microorganisms that we might have, they are going to be found in lots of different places. So they might be found in throughout your home, on your clothing, in your hair, on your phone, um, anywhere you can imagine. There are microorganisms. They can either just persist there, or they can be actively growing if it's an environment that has a high moisture content. Where we very commonly find microorganisms that are likely to cause infection are in humans, animals, and very soiled environments. The reservoir may or may not be the source from which the agent is transferred. For example, you can find Clostridium botulinum in the soil, but the actual cause of like a Clostridium botulinum infection would be the toxin in a canned food that was improperly treated. So you can find an organism in a place, but sometimes they've moved to another location and either produced a toxin or grown to really high numbers that can then cause illness. So again, it goes back to they are very crafty and they have evolved many very unique ways to be able to cause illness. Okay. So again, thinking back to that chain of infection, if we could break one of those links, like we could, for instance, we control the organisms or we can influence the reservoir or where they're found, then we could still prevent transmission or infection from occurring. Portal of exit is another point where we could actually break the chain. The portal of exit is the path by which the organism leaves its host. In the case of environmental organisms, it's a little bit different, but here I'm specifically speaking about if we just go back and think about these respiratory viruses. Respiratory viruses, think about it, they're in you and they're going to leave you by a sneeze or a cough. There are other ways that pathogens can leave your body, like through feces, through vomiting, through blood, through urine. But in the case of respiratory viruses, that primary mode is through sneezing and coughing. The portal of exit usually corresponds to the site where the pathogen is localized, but not always. But for example, influenza viruses, they exit through the respiratory tract, but schistosomiasis actually through the urine and cholera through feces. So again, the individual organism has a different mechanism by which it might leave your body. In the case of flu, COVID-19, and RSV, it's through coughing and sneezing. Again, in the public health arena, we talk about how contact or transmission then takes place. So having something just be in the environment isn't necessarily enough. There has to be uptake by a host. On the left-hand side, you see a nice green hand, and that has been loaded with something called glow germ. And so it's supposed to mimic what a microorganism does if you come in contact with it. And so we have this really neat exercise where we might have people come into a room and we hand out pens, and then 20 minutes later we might say, "Oh, we put something on the pens in order to simulate how microorganisms move throughout the environment." And so you've touched something, and now we're going to look at your hands to see whether or not you transmitted those organisms from the device. And so we would look at everybody's hands, and under a UV light, their hands would glow. And so you could very clearly see that through touching, you have picked up a microorganism. And as you'll see, in the later presentation, some of the most significant ways that we do pick up microorganisms is through direct contact of high touch surfaces, like light switches, handles of any sort, door handles, drawer handles, desks, things like that. But in the case of respiratory viruses, we can also contract or take those into our body through droplets in the air, through somebody sneezing or coughing. This particular image on the right, and I'm sure many of you have seen this, is simply somebody sneezing. And if you just look at the sheer magnitude of what comes out of their body, it is significant. And so, what interestingly happens is those particles, many of them are aerosolized and they can hang or be maintained in the air for a period of time, depending on the environmental conditions in the space. But what also happens is they float to surfaces. And so then you come along and you're touching, or even an intermediate object might touch, and then you come in contact with that. Um, what we're also finding through our particular studies at Lysol Pro Solutions is not only do droplets like this stay on surfaces, but they can be re-aerosolized through regular movement, even from soft surfaces such as carpet. So if you have somebody sneezing like this and the droplets are, you know, go all over the place, if it's not taken care of in the appropriate amount of time, they can actually be re-aerosolized to the point that they could then be re-inhaled. Scary thought, but we're proving that this is scientifically possible. So that underpins again what I'm saying about germs spread very easily. They are everywhere. And if you come in contact, if you touch, even if some of your soft clothing might, come in contact with something on the floor, maybe something in a restroom, you leave a bag, they can then be spread to other locations. I wanted to show this really quick video and talk you through just a simple example. Like, all of us prepare food. So here we have an analyst who is cutting up chicken, and we know chicken is highly contaminated with salmonella and campylobacter. So just regular touching, she's going about her business, cutting the chicken. So again, direct contact. And then what you're going to see is she's going to put her hand on one of these plates that is going to allow her to grow whatever is on her hand. Okay. But then she's going to come in and do what's called an intervention. And what she's doing is she's using an antibacterial soap. So this holds true if you're using a disinfectant, a spray, a trigger, it doesn't matter. Some form of intervention that will remove that from your hard surface, your soft surface, your body. And now she's going to touch the other plate, and then through the magic of time-lapse photography, we're going to see that on the left-hand side, before intervention, something grew. And those are actual microorganisms that grew on there. So this is, again, just a visual to help you see that if it's on your hand, it can be transmitted to other areas. And then since you can't see it, it's likely to be further transmitted to a new host. The portal of entry refers to the way a pathogen enters a susceptible host. This portal of entry must provide access to the tissues in which the pathogen can multiply or a toxin specifically can act. So, for instance, in the case of flu, if you got a flu virus on an open wound, it's not going to matter. That's not a place where they can actually enter and multiply. It's going to act specifically on your respiratory tract. There are, however, some other infectious agents they do have multiple points of entry and they can still cause infection. But in case of respiratory viruses, it's entirely through the respiratory tract. They have to be inhaled in order to cause an illness. Now, they can enter your respiratory tract through the nose or also sometimes through the eye, strangely enough. But they are limited in how they can get into your body. So often infectious agents use the same portal to enter a host that they use to exit the host. Just like I'm saying, they enter the respiratory tract, and that's how they're going to then multiply and exit the respiratory tract. Pathogens that cause gastroenteritis, though, so-called the fecal-oral route, they exit the host in the feces. They might enter through the mouth, but they're going to exit through the feces. Other portals of entry include the skin for like hookworm, some of your mucous membranes for syphilis, and even your blood in the case of something like hepatitis B and HIV. But for respiratory viruses specifically, it's inhaling or through the nose and eye. So again, if you have people who are coughing and sneezing, that material is being deposited on your hard and soft surfaces. If somebody touches it, it's possible that they're gonna come in contact, rub their nose, rub their eyes, but also through that re-aerosolization process of touching, and it comes back into the air for them to be re-inhaling it. So a very complicated way that this occurs. So the other thing that is very important to consider is the susceptibility of the host. Obviously, this depends on a number of factors, including that individual's genetic makeup, their specific age, circumstances. But some of the other things that could increase your susceptibility are your age, also the your immune system. Are you battling other types of illnesses like heart disease, cancer, immune diseases? Those things can also increase your susceptibility. And what I mean by that is it would take less of an organism to make you sick than it would somebody who is fully healthy. So here's the good news. There are actually lots of ways that we can break the chain of infection. I know that Brian is going to talk with you in a few minutes about understanding your particular environment, what organisms or what situations you're trying to target. And having that information and understanding that not every organism is going to be impacted by the same intervention is really the most important step, I believe. But if you can follow a number of different things, you can actually successfully break the chain of infection and prevent infection from occurring in your facility. The number one area is really hand hygiene because of the direct contact route and touching, and then bringing that material up to your face. That's really one of the most effective ways that we can break the chain of infection. Vaccines, depending on the type of illness, is another area. Coughing or covering your coughs and sneezes is also a good it's a really good way, but some of our research is also finding that even in the case of using your elbow for sneezing, that material can still survive and persist on your clothing. So there is still the potential for it to be distributed in a given environment. So it's not the best intervention, but it is still an intervention if you have nothing else. We've also seen through the course of the pandemic that wearing masks is effective, but it's not necessarily a long-term solution for preventing every particular illness. We've also seen through the course of the pandemic is maintaining social distance. I honestly didn't know what that meant until the pandemic. I know a lot of us didn't. So that one, but obviously it makes sense. And if you think about why that would be, it's the contact, but also the aerosolization or the dispersing of just speaking, coughing, sneezing, anything like that. Particles come out of your mouth and have the ability to infect other people. So most relevant for each of you, though, is the concept of cleaning and disinfecting high touch surfaces. All of these surfaces like countertops, sinks, toilet handles, computer keyboards, and any other surface that you touch frequently or a lot of people spend a lot of time in contact with. We also see that this is the case for soft surfaces as well, such as carpets and curtains. So I hope that was helpful. At this point, we are going to pause just a moment for some questions. If anybody'd like to ask a question.
So, Julie, we have one question. Good job, by the way, with your presentation. And when the pandemic started, that social distancing, I thought that meant you get closer, but I was wrong. We learned quickly, didn't we?
Yes, yes, we did.
So here's a question for you before we get to Brian's presentation. Can someone be contagious if they don't have any symptoms?
The sad answer is yes. And we do believe that that is actually how COVID-19 spread so significantly to begin with. As a perfect example, is people didn't have symptoms or they didn't have standard symptoms. So 100% you can still be contagious and infectious without symptoms.
All right. Kind of scary in a way. You just never know, but
Yes, yes,
we do what we can to be safe. Okay.
yes.
Well, thank you for that. We'll have more questions at the end. We have a few more to ask, but let's go ahead and invite Brian Leafblad, Lysol Pro Solutions Research and Development Senior Manager, to share his thoughts on today's topic. So, Brian, the floor is yours.
Yep, thank you. And thank you, Julie. And just a real quick bit of background for everybody. So my background is I'm a chemist, and that's where all my experience is in related to understanding how we can tie science to performance at the customer level, and then developing the formulas, developing the process, and creating those solutions for how we do that. So I'm going to get into a couple of things related to how we can protect our facilities now that we understand better and know some of this information that Julie was just sharing with us. One of the ways that we work at Lysol Pro Solutions is Julie and her team bring the microbiology side. Me and my team will bring the chemistry side, and we bring the two together. We have to understand both sides together and to be able to effectively develop a solution and then drive a process that is actually going to deliver results. So when we think about everything that Julie was just sharing with us, my next question or next thought is, in a way, so what? Right? What do we do with that? We have, if we understand all this, now what? Now, what do we do with all of that information? And there's really, we're going to start high level and gradually build down into some more details. And there's really four main areas that we think about first that are related to how we protect facilities. So as we go to the next slide there, we'll touch on these four a little bit and then gradually get into some more detail. The first one being product performance. The products have to work. All right, that's the obvious. That's a baseline, right? If you're using a product that is intended to clean and disinfect the surface and it doesn't actually do those jobs, you're wasting your time and you're wasting your money and you're not getting the results that you need to get. So obviously the product itself has to work. Another aspect of this is that it really needs to work the first time, right? If it only works partially, and so you have to redo a job 2, 3, 4 times, now you're touching into productivity. And yes, you may still ultimately get to a final result that you're looking for, but you've wasted a ton of time and money and effort now to get there because you've had to repeat doing things over and over and over and over again. The second aspect of productivity, though, really is going to tie into process. And we'll talk more about process in a minute, where once you have a product that actually works, how can you effectively use that product in your process to deliver the ultimate result? If you, for example, let's say you're a BSc owner. Actually, let me switch it up a bit. I saw we have a bunch of education folks on the call today. You work at a university, right? And so you're going in and you have a building that has 7 or 8 stories in it with multiple rooms on there. If your central storage for all your supplies is down in the basement and somebody is up on the 8th floor and they run out of a product, now they have to walk all the way back down to the basement, refill, and go back up. So that which wastes a ton of time that they could be using to clean and disinfect the spaces. So that's the other aspect of productivity that ties to process, right? How can we create that combination of product and process so that when you actually use a product that works, you're able to do it in the most effective way to get results without wasting a bunch of time running all over the place. The third aspect of this touches on safety. This is both safety for you and your employees, and it's also safety for the patrons and customers that might be in the spaces where you're cleaning and disinfecting, right? I mean, if at home you clean your bathroom once, or if you have a larger house, maybe you clean 2 or 3 bathrooms, then you're done, right? But if you're an actual professional cleaner who goes out, you might be cleaning 20, 30 bathrooms in a building, and you may be doing that 2, 3 times a day, and then you do it the next day and the next day and the next day. So the product exposure that you experience as a professional cleaner is much higher than what we experience just as consumers at home, right? So we need to pay attention to how does that exposure affect the people that are actually using the product in terms of health and chemical exposure risk to them. And then also the environment, what it does to the environment then where they're using it. Can they recycle packaging? Are we putting volatile organic compounds up into the air that's going to affect in the indoor air quality? So we pay attention to the safety. The last one I'm going to touch on a little bit here is brand recognition. This is more of a recent phenomenon, right? Pre-pandemic, our industry in a way was largely invisible, right? Because there was almost this thought that if I as a customer walk into a public space building and I see somebody cleaning, that means that there was something dirty that they had to clean, which would leave a negative impact then. And I think, oh, this place is dirty. I don't want to frequent here as a customer. But what happened through the pandemic, and one of the effects of it, is that people actually want to see the spaces being cleaned and disinfected. They want to know when they walk into a store, a school, a restaurant, a stadium, a hotel, that space has been cleaned and disinfected. And having that visual representation of somebody doing the work with a product and a system that they trust and that they understand gives them that combination. So we start off with these four big buckets of things. And now we're going to dig into a little bit of what are some more of the specific types of factors that we need to pay attention to. One of them is another lasting effect of COVID, which is how things are shifting in the marketplace and the expectations. In order to accommodate that, we talk about something that we call adaptive cleaning, right? With our industry, you want to have process. You need to have consistency. In order to drive consistent performance and results, people need to be doing the same task the same way every time they're doing it. However, things are changing. If you go into, say, an office building, for example, and we'll get into some more of this in a minute, but you go to an office building that has a hybrid work environment, on Monday, they may only have 25% of their people there. But now you come in on Wednesday and they're up at 80, 90% of their people. That environment then is very different because of the people load. And so how do you design a process and a system to accommodate for that so that you're not wasting time and effort on the front end on Monday when people aren't there, but you're also not undercutting and losing results on Wednesday when everybody else is there. So we need a little bit of flexibility while still maintaining consistency with the dependent on those hybrid work models. Worker shortage is another big change that has happened recently over the last, say, 4 or 5 years, particularly as minimum wage levels have shifted across the country. Now we're competing with other industries on a level that we didn't have to before to get good employees because they can make more money in other industries than they used to be able to make. So we get a lot of turnover, and it can be really hard to find good people to hire for our businesses to actually do the work of cleaning and disinfecting. Put all that together, along with inflation that we've experienced over the last 4 or 5 years, costs are way up. So results are important, process is important, but we also have to do it in a way that is financially feasible. Right? We have to be able to control our costs so that we're able to deliver the results in a way that still allows us to effectively run a business and pay our people and then deliver value to our end use customers. So that's all of that is a few factors that tie into this concept of adaptive cleaning. I'm going to get into some of them a little bit more precisely. And one in particular is some of this remote working, right? You hear a lot about this in the news. Companies are reevaluating, they're shifting over time what the policies are as far as how much do they require their people to actually be at work or be able to work remotely from home. You will see a wide range of models here. And particularly if you're a larger BSC, for example, you may have customers in multiple industries that have very, very different staffing models. Now, if you're in a school, it's probably very much largely the same as what it was pre-pandemic. Unless it's an online school, of course, in order for schools to work, you need teachers in the classroom, students there, staff there in order for that school to actually function. So schools aren't necessarily going to be all that different than what they were pre-pandemic. And as other industries have come back, those have all shifted to be much more similar to what they were in the first place too. What this really speaks to is an opportunity for you to understand either your environment, if you are the people actually doing the work, if you're the provider, if you're the BSC who then goes into a customer, understand their environment. All right. So no matter which camp you fall into, this is a place where you want to have a conversation with your customer and with the people that you interact with to understand how is their environment being used in terms of when are people there, how many people tend to be there, how does the traffic flow work. It's really about gathering information first to understand where people are and how they're working. And from there we can, if you think about some of these different industries that I was talking about, it may be very, very different if you're in a hotel or if you're in an office building. So if we look at the next slide, you get a little bit of an idea of the scope of this industry. Commercial building market is massive. It's huge, and it's spread over quite a few different industries and different customer segments. So if you're the person that's doing the work in education, you're going to be focused there. If you're an office building person, then you would be focused there. If you're a provider, you may have an arena that is your customer. Maybe I'd say a baseball stadium. You might also have a church. You could have a hotel chain. And so you might have three very different customers that you're now trying to take into account how they do what they do. So all of this leads back to, again, have the conversations with your customers to make sure that you understand how does their environment function? What are the specific needs of that particular environment? Because that's going to be foundational knowledge that we use to then build the program that we're trying to create. Within these segments, we talked a bit about hybrid workplace before, and the next slide shows you a bit of a graph. This is a more typical distribution of what we're seeing in a lot of hybrid workplaces. People will, if they can, will tend to work from home Monday and Friday, get the nice long weekend, be a little more relaxed, and then they'll come into the office more often midweek. If you're an office building type of a customer, this is pretty common these days. But if you're not an office building, then what type of an occupancy are you looking at? All right, give you an example of an arena. In this way, if your customer is a baseball stadium, a hockey arena, a football stadium, something like that, you'd want to understand how that operates. Like I said, I don't know if you guys saw it. I said in the chat, I'm currently in Minnesota. If I was the one that was going in to clean the stadium downtown St. Paul where the Minnesota Wild play, game day, if they have, say, a 7:30 puck drop for the game at night, you might think, well, the game is 7:30, people might get there a little bit early, but the primary concentration of people in the stadium is going to be late afternoon to evening. That's actually not the case. For a night game, people are showing up at 7 a.m. They show up at the very beginning, and you have both staff for the arena that are there, and you have team personnel that are showing up. And so then there's a staggered schedule that they follow throughout the day on a game day where there's people in and out of the building. And so then they're using the bathrooms, they're in the locker rooms, they're on ice, and they're coming off and on with that. They're in rooms where they're meeting and doing strategy, and then they need food. So then they're eating lunch, things like that. So if you start first with the industry, the customer segment that you're working in, then you can take this step of understanding what your occupancy level is going to look like, and does it vary day to day, and then does it vary within a day. And you'll see very different patterns depending on which types of customers you're looking at. So all of those things start first, customer understanding. Understand your environment if you're the end customer that's actually doing the work. If you're a provider that's providing it to another customer, understand their environment. Once you understand that, now we can get into the next step, which is really a combination of product and process. All right, so we're going to need both. When it comes to product and process, obviously the first one is we have to delight our customers, right? Us as a provider selling product to our customers, you as a service provider providing that service to your customer. If the customer isn't happy, they're not going to buy your product. They're not going to buy your service. And so everybody loses. So in the end, that's ultimately what we're driving to. We need to get performance consistently that delights our customers. The facility wellness, we talked a little bit about this already. You heard the microbiology side of it from Julie already. If we have illness-causing microorganisms all over our facility and we don't do something about it, people are going to get sick. So we need to address that. The reliable performance and cost management, we touched on that already, so I'll skip over that. The staff and labor support. We talked about the challenges with getting good employees. One of the other challenges is in keeping them. And it ties back to the products and the process in the form of training, right? While we're talking about an adaptive cleaning system where we're flexible on some things, there's a number of elements of the program that need to be constant. We need to be able to train somebody and have them do it the right way. even if their intentions are good, if they go into their customer and clean a conference room, if they're not doing it the right way, they're not going to get the results that you need. So training is really, really important. The simpler we can make the product usage and the process by which they do it, the better. The more consistent results we're going to get. So we ultimately need to create this mix, this combination of products and SOPs, standard operating procedures. That's our product and process. So how do we get there, right? To get there now, I'm going to talk about 3 areas. I'm going to touch on these each individually. Texture, frequency, and time are some of the considerations that you need to think about as you're creating your process, your SOPs. We're going to talk first about texture. This is one aspect that gets at what Julie referred to earlier as high touch points, right? If your high touch point is something like an elevator button, that can be really, really challenging to clean and disinfect effectively because of its size and its shape. Right? If you think about the last time you were in an elevator and you walked up, some elevator buttons are thick enough that they protrude out the front of the plate that surrounds it. Some of them are more recessed. Some are round, some are square, some are indented, some are rounded. You get all kinds of different shapes. If you take a disinfecting wipe or you take a cloth that has a disinfectant on it and you just wipe across that button, depending on the shape and size of the button, you're not actually going to touch the surface of the button itself. You're mainly just going to be touching the plate that's around the outside and you're going to skip right over the button. So you think you're disinfecting that button, but in the end, you're really not. Same kind of thing can happen with door handles, with railings, with remote controls. So with this, you need to take a look at the surface. If you're cleaning desks, tables, windows, things like that are flat, that's easy. The ones that are uneven surfaces are where you need to pay a little bit more attention and make sure you're actually contacting the touching surface part of it with the product, and that you're leaving enough product on there to leave it wet long enough for the contact time. Right? Those are a couple of really important factors when it comes to disinfection. Look on the usage instructions for your disinfectant, and it will tell you how long that surface has to stay wet in order for that disinfectant to work. So make sure that you're touching the surfaces that you need to, and that you're leaving that surface wet enough to stay wet for however long that particular product needs to be on there. Another aspect that I'll touch on real quick on this one is related to the usage instructions. There's a couple of different ways, and Julie's team they do this testing, they provide all this expertise for us, which we then translate into usage instructions on our product. How the products tell you to apply it is really, really important because it's based on how the product was tested and registered with EPA. Right? So if the product says, if it's a liquid that comes in a trigger sprayer, or you concentrate, you dilute it down, put it in a trigger, if the usage instructions say, spray, apply the product to the surface, leave wet for X number of minutes, then wipe with a cloth. If the instructions are something like that, then that is the process you need to follow. Right? If you think, okay, I'm just going to spray the cloth with my product and then wipe the surface, you don't do that. It doesn't work that way. All right. We can't guarantee that doing it by spraying the cloth first and then wiping it is actually going to work if the usage instructions say to spray the surface, because we test those products differently. So as it applies to some of these surfaces, make sure you're touching the surface itself that actually needs to be disinfected. And then make sure you're following the usage instructions for the product itself that tells you exactly how to do it. All right, so we'll move on to the next phase of this, which really gets to frequency. And there's a couple of aspects to frequency. And ultimately, both of these tie back to that concept of high touch points. The surfaces that people are interacting with the most are the ones that you need to pay the most attention to. Right? If you have a long hallway in your building that people just walk up and down, the walls and the ceilings of that building are rarely, if ever, going to be touched. So they would not be primary sources for people to potentially pick up germs on their hands. or to rub against to re-aerosolize something to pick it up, right? So those types of things would be things we would want to clean for aesthetic reasons periodically, but not be part of breaking the chain of infection and needing to disinfect them for that purpose. Instead, we're focused on the things like door handles, coffee pot handles, refrigerator doors, shared equipment, things that people touch a lot are those high touch point surfaces that we need to focus the most attention on. And one way you can help figure out what those are going to be are going to be looking at the high foot traffic areas in your facility. But if you're in an office building, employee break rooms would be a big one. Conference rooms that are particularly busy are going to be another one. Airport, if you do an airport, where are the most people going to be walking through an airport? Places like the bathrooms, the check-in counter at the beginning when you check in, get your boarding pass and drop off your bag. Stadium concession areas where people are walking up. They may touch it, they'll rest their hand on it, they may set a purse or a backpack on a surface. And when you have hundreds or thousands of people coming through that space in a day, that's where your high touch point surfaces are going to be. And the last area gets us into time. Okay, there's two aspects related to time. And we address one of them here in this concept of static versus dynamic environments. And that's because time is really related to how much time do people spend in an environment where there is a potential for germs to be, and then how much is that environment changing? All right. If for example, Julie and I sit in a conference room together for 3 days working on a project, our risk of getting sick is largely based on whether either one of us is infectious and we're bringing in the germs that could potentially make the other person sick. But if instead we go to a baseball game and you've got 25,000 fans in the baseball stadium and we're going out and getting something to drink, and then you run and use the bathroom, and then you're back in your seat, and then you go buy some memorabilia, as that traffic flow increases where you have so many people milling around, the surfaces that we interact with and the airspace that we're around is now impacted by every other person that's been through that space before us. So the chain of infection could be one sick person comes in, they have germs on their hand, they touch a door handle. Now I walk in, I touch that same door handle, I've picked up the germs on my hand, but I don't know it. I drop off my stuff at my desk, I go use the restroom. I push on the push plate that's on the door. Now I've left some germs on the door of the restroom. Coworker comes along behind me to the same restroom. They touch that door plate. Now they have germs on their hand. The domino effect of surface to person to surface to person, or I shake somebody's hand and you get person to person transmission. As the more people we have involved in those cycles, as people mill around and move, the greater the time exposure and concern is going to be with the potential for people being exposed to germs. So what do we do with these? Really, we want to combine them ideally, because you can think about each one of them by itself, but the places where they overlap and you find the connections, those are going to be the highest risk locations. So ask yourself three main questions. One of them is, where are the most people spending the most time? If you have 2 people in a space for 8 hours, that's going to have one set of risks. If you have 200 people in a space for 8 hours, that's going to be a lot more risk because of the greater number of people. So think about where most of the people are most of the time, and then within that space, what are the surfaces that those people are touching the most? Those are the spaces you want to focus on cleaning and disinfecting the most frequently. And then the third piece is that when you clean and disinfect those surfaces, pay attention to the specifics of the surface itself. Is there anything related to how rough it is, or the size of it, or the accessibility of it? Is it rounded? Is it curved? Is it indented? Are there grooves in it where something could be growing down inside that groove? Find those connections. Those are the spaces where you want to focus the most of your time, because those are going to be the places with the greatest chance that they're going to be harboring some illness-causing germ that somebody could come along and bring into their body. All right, so I gave you a lot of things to think about as we do this. Once you think through all of those things, what you're ultimately building out is a scope of work, an SOW, right? This is going to become your SOP. It's your standard operating procedure. And there's a couple of main reasons behind doing this. If you go through and define what are those key areas where the most people are spending the most time, within those areas, what are the surfaces they're touching? And then how frequently are you going to clean and disinfect those surfaces? Set up that workflow, write it down, list it out. This will do a couple of things for you. If you are the provider that is now providing those services to customers of yours, this is where you can, one, show your understanding and expertise of your customer, where you can show them that you're providing value to them because you are accounting for the areas that is going to most directly affect them, right? If the check-in desk at a hotel is a main area where people are going in and out, you want to be able to communicate to your customer, my staff, we're going to clean and disinfect this desk because that is where, one, your employees sit and touch. That is where all of your customers are coming in and out. And so we're gonna clean and disinfect that area to provide the greatest level of protection for the people that are coming in and out, which minimizes and reduces the risk of somebody getting sick, and which allows your customers to be happier because now they're not getting sick picking up something in your environment, and it enables your employees to be more productive and to stay at work. So if you're providing that service to somebody else, this can be your template for having that conversation where you show value to your customer. And if you have something, if you're missing something in here where they say, oh, I'm really concerned about this other area in my building, you can always add it in, right? It gives you the flexibility to build it to show your customer to say, I really understand your business and we're providing value to you. The second aspect of this then is it becomes a training tool for your staff. And like we were saying earlier, with turnover, with the challenge of getting good people to hire and bring onto the teams, training becomes really, really important. You want to make sure that your staff is doing things the right way every time. And this becomes a training tool. It's their list, their checklist of what they follow so that they know what exactly they're supposed to do and how to do it. So all of this workflow, everything that we've been talking about today, ultimately leads to this process of what are my employees going to do that and allow them to break that chain of infection to minimize the risk of my employees, our customers, somebody actually getting sick. So with that, we're going to wrap up with just summarize a few key benefits with this that ties back to what we were talking about at the very beginning. In the end, customer satisfaction is what it's all about, right? Whether you're the one that's selling the product or you're the one that's providing the service, if your customer is not happy, either you have to fix it or you lose the customer. Either way, that's not a good solution situation that any of us want. And so we want to provide that to our customers. Then the next is related to people getting sick. We want to make sure that we can minimize that risk. We can never 100% guarantee that we're going to keep people from getting sick. That's not what this is about. We can't ever say that for sure. What we are talking about is reducing that risk. And we do that through products that we trust, performance that we can depend on, and procedure that has been set up to deliver the optimal results. We always have to manage costs and control that. That's always going to be a part of what we need to do. And then in the end, it comes back to people. It's always about people. It's about our employees and our customers, delivering value to them that protects and enables people to live the life that they want to live in the public spaces is ultimately what we're all about. So with that, I'm going to wrap up and I think we can bring Jeff back on. Sounds like we may have a few questions that we can get to. And either myself or Julie will be happy to answer any questions.
Absolutely. Nice job, Ryan. Good information. I'm glad we have chemists out there, microbiologists handling all this for us. So Julie, welcome back. Let's do a couple of questions that we have. Let's see, here's one. Julie, let's go to you. How long can viruses like flu and COVID-19 stay infectious on surfaces? Now, I know we can Google the answer, but you tell us.
Yeah. Well, there's still actually a lot of debate about COVID-19, but the prevailing belief is that that virus can remain active on surfaces up to 9 days. It depends on the surface. Plastics, for some reason, it can persist longer. The flu virus can last about 48 hours.
Okay.
Simple.
And that question was for Julie, but either one of you can add. Brian, anything to add to that?
With one thing, thinking about one aspect of this from a process standpoint,
Hmm.
you don't necessarily know what germs are on your surface. And Julie gave a couple of examples there, but they have different lifespans on a surface. You don't necessarily know what you're dealing with. So that's why we're talking about having a process. In a way, it doesn't matter what germ is on your surface because your process will always deliver the results.
Okay. They need a light that like you shine on and it shows you exactly what it is. Maybe a color code.
Well, if you
Yeah,
want
there's
to
some
really get
technology
into
out
the
there. Yeah.
hardcore, yeah, if you want to get into the hardcore science, there are ways we can do that.
Yeah.
But that's more something that like Julie and I and our team, we have fun playing with that stuff,
Yeah.
but our
Yes.
customers typically
Yes.
don't.
The commercialization of those has been
Okay.
not possible.
Yeah.
Well, that'll be next week's webinar. All right. So we'll plan on that. Brian, this question's for you. How can I work out how frequently different hotspots need to be cleaned?
One thing that I would recommend is, okay, so there's a couple of aspects to this. So everything that we had just been talking about related to high touch point surfaces, traffic flow, people coming through there, those are the considerations to take into account. A couple of guidelines then based on how that happens in the facility that you're trying to clean. If you have a relatively low traffic flow and you have a relatively confined group of people, if you have 5 people in a space and it's the same 5 people, you can do it much less frequently. If it's constantly changing, you want to do it much more frequently. So on the low end, we would recommend at least once a day, right? If it's a low risk environment, roughly every 8 hours, once a work day is typically going to be enough. The higher touch point surfaces and the places that people frequent more or go into more frequently, you'd want to do more frequently than that, right? If it's an average environment that it's just a normal workday, those higher touch point surfaces, you can build in doing it twice a day. So roughly every 4 hours. If you know you're in a high risk area, if the cases of flu just skyrocket in your particular area, chances are pretty good you've got infectious people in your building and they may not know it. So if there's something locally happening at any point, then I would ramp that up even more frequently and do it every couple hours on just those high touch point surfaces. It doesn't mean you have to do the whole building, but for a shorter time period during the height of exposure risk, do it every couple of hours on those higher touch point surfaces. As the risk goes down, then you can switch back to a more regular once a day, once every half a day type of a cadence.
All right. Thank you. And Julie, anything to add to that?
No, well, we've internally done a great deal of work around looking at frequency and sort of the application of multiple products to improve this transmission outcome. And I do agree with what Brian's saying. There needs to be in those high touch surfaces a high frequency, and it's because not only the persistence of organisms, but as Brian is getting to, it's the constant touching. It's the constant recontamination of those spaces. Some of the work we've done shows within minutes, those types of spaces can become recontaminated to pre-disinfection levels. I mean, so it happens very quickly. So yeah, frequency is definitely important in understanding that space.
Yeah. And it gives us confidence when we see the cleaners in the buildings doing all that, keeping everyone safe.
Yeah.
Brian, this question, let's start with you. Should my disinfection protocol change based on whether I'm trying to kill the flu, COVID, or something else? Protocols.
For the most part, I would say no. There's a couple of caveats though. One is if your environment has specific requirements where you need to be able to kill and pay attention to particular organisms. right? For example, if you're in healthcare and you need a high sterile environment, absolutely, right? Your product and your protocol needs to be specific to the particular organisms that you would need to kill. If you're disinfecting an operating room theater, you would need a much higher level of disinfection than what you would need in an office building. So it is somewhat industry dependent. But if you don't have those specific concerns, then in that case, I would say for the most part, you shouldn't do it. What you should do is make sure you're using a product that has claims against the organisms that you care about, right? And find one product that will kill all of the organisms that you care about. If you have to have one product to kill flu and another one to kill RSV and a third one to kill COVID, there is no way that your staff is going to manage that well or consistently. I mean, we're human beings. People make mistakes, forget, right? So if those three are your organisms of concern, make sure you have one product that has claims and instructions for how to kill all three of them, and then that's your process.
I like that. We need products that work, but we also have to keep it simple for people. Yeah. Julie, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add to that. What we use for our development process is really a concept of hierarchy. Because we have the fundamental understanding of the types of organisms and how you kill them, there is an order of magnitude. Something like, interestingly, Ebola is very easy to kill because the way it's made. It's very similar to the flu and COVID-19. It is easy to kill on the surface, but you still have to do it. And so we can understand that. And so we group things into classes. If you can kill RSV, you can kill flu, and you can kill COVID. Those things, they go hand in hand. So that's really good. But rarely are those the only things there. Going back to something Brian said a few minutes ago, you have no idea what's there, and there's always going to be a huge distribution of magnitude of different things. And so you want to look for a product that has sort of that highest kill level and that kills the most difficult, like norovirus, for instance, is a good one that's then going to kill lots of other things.
Well, folks, we are out of time. You both love your work, don't you?
Yes.
We do.
Well, I want to thank you both for today's webinar and Lysol Pro Solutions as well, because this is the information people need. Any questions that were asked we didn't get to, we'll follow up later on with those individuals. But Julie, Brian, thank you, and we'll see you at the next webinar.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much.